Streaming
Oh,
now.
beautiful. It's all happening now. Okay. So, hello everyone and welcome back. Hope you had a lovely break. Before we do anything, I'm going to do another acknowledgement. So, again, acknowledging that I am currently occupying Boonwurrung country. I want to pay my respects to Boonwurrung elders past, present and emerging. And I ask all of you, I invite all of you to pay the same respects, please, to the elders of the land that you are occupying. And as we've mentioned in our screen names, some of us have listed the country where we are. You're welcome to do that yourselves. I also want to acknowledge that this land for all of us always has been and always will be sovereign Aboriginal land. And I would also like to acknowledge any First Nations or Aboriginal people who are with us today, either in our webinar stream or in our Zoom. On the note of screen names, can we please have everybody change their screen names to say the on member surname, or just on member surname is fine. So for example, mine would be on member Paleologudius. If you're not sure what that should say or how to do that, please just let us know. But we would love for everybody's screen names to reflect that. Also your Zoom background, if you can have our lovely assembly behind you, that would be fantastic. But if not, if Zoom backgrounds just don't work for you, that's fine. Cool, that's all that. One thing I wanted to flag, and it's a little bit off topic, but really quickly, for one of our debates tomorrow, it is Ballarat, and Ballarat is in need of some speakers. So if you're in Kyra's house and you'd be willing to step up and volunteer for Ballarat, I'll make sure it gets put in our thread. I actually think I left the thread, so I can't do it myself, but I'll make sure it gets popped into the thread. And if we could have 5 speakers to step up for tomorrow, and also another 5 for refuting, which is on Thursday, that would be fantastic. Very happy to follow this up offline with you if you have further questions, but just putting that out there that we do need 5 for both bills for Ballarat. Okay, lovely. I think I've done all my housekeeping. If anything comes up, just shoot me a message, task force on Discord or in Zoom or whatever. And otherwise, I might just throw to Paul for a moment. Paul, if you just want to introduce yourself for us.
Thanks, Ellie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Groener-Wigan. I work for the Legislative Assembly at the Parliament of Victoria. My title is the Assistant Clerk, Procedure and Sergeant at Arms. So I'm one of the clerks at the table. So I'm here to help out if I can with any sort of procedural advice, which is what my role would normally be on a sitting day. Back to you, Ellie. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Paul. And with that, we're hearing, is this correct? We're hearing Skyline's bill? Lovely. Thanks, everyone. So we will, in a moment, hear from Skyline, who are our sponsors, and Melbourne High Changemakers as our refuters. We're going to be talking about the Raising the Age of Criminal Responsibility bill, which is really exciting. I might just, before we do start, introduce Sam. Would you like to introduce yourself as our speaker for this debate?
Oh, thanks, Ellie. My name's Sam Hibbins. I am the Member of Parliament for the Prahran District. Amongst my portfolio duties for the Greens is the youth portfolio. So I really value this, really love Youth Parliament and really value the opportunity to be the speaker for this session. It's a really relevant and really topical bill that we're debating today. You might be aware that governments around Australia are actually considering this very issue as we speak. So I'm really keen to hear the arguments from both sides of this debate. And also really keen to see how online parliament works as well. It's something we haven't quite managed here in the actual Victorian Parliament over the last couple of years. So there might be some lessons learnt for the wider parliament as well. So good luck everyone in the debate.
Thanks very much, Sam. I know that we're certainly learning lots of lessons about online parliament, myself especially. Beautiful. I think we've done everything we need to. So with that, Paul, I might ask you to just kind of signpost the beginning.
Sure, Ali. So we're going to move on to introductions of bills. And the The next item on the agenda is the Raising the Age of Criminal Responsibility Bill 2021.
And I call on the sponsor of the bill.
Speaker, the Honourable Member Van. I move to introduce a bill titled Raising the Age of Criminal Responsibility Bill 2021.
And the question is that the bill be now read a first time. All of those that opinion say A, to the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member
Van.
I would like to acknowledge that the discussion of this bill will discuss the subject matter regarding systemic violence faced by First Nations peoples and criminal activity. If this information is of any concern to any members in this chamber, they are encouraged to step out, mute their volume, and return in a few minutes' time. I also begin today by acknowledging the land I am currently residing in and its traditional custodians of the Wajibuluk, Jadwa, Jadwajali, Wadgaya, and Jopagik Nations people, and the traditional custodians of the lands on which we all individually meet today. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I now wish to draw the attention of the House to the matters concerning the Raising the Age of Criminal Responsibility Bill, brought forward in light of current events surrounding the nationally prominent Raise the Age campaign and the continued negative and detrimental effects against children affected by juvenile incarceration, an issue that has been ignored for far too long under the eyes of legislative bodies. In reference to this bill, I would first like to bring attention to the clause 1, where the main purpose of the bill is to increase the current minimum age of criminal responsibility of age 10 years old to that of 14 years old as a part of a universal approach and exempt of any carve-outs of serious crimes. This is with the additional intent that children between the ages of 10 and 14 will be removed from the juvenile detention system and instead create pathways that will assist these children in reintegrating into a wider society and create a more supportive network that will foster the growth and development of these children. As a part of this bill, we will establish a Victorian Youth Justice and Advocacy Body, otherwise known as VYJAB, consisting of members from the individual bodies of the Department of Justice and Community Safety, Department of Families, Fairness and Housing, the Parkville College Collaborators, Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Council, and Youth Affairs Council Victoria. This body will deliberate over the matters of how current and subsequent child offenders will be processed and reviewed through the juvenile legal system, as well as how rehabilitative and educational programs will be implemented and operated as a part of the new system of how children at risk of offending or reoffending will be dealt with when convicted of a crime. In further delving into the alternative programs to that of the juvenile detention system, Clause 8 of the bill outlines the matter of establishing a rehabilitative program for all children and at-risk child offenders between the ages of 10 and 14. The VYJAB shall introduce a rehabilitative program that will cater to the different physical, mental, socioeconomic, and cultural positionalities of each child. It will focus on the necessitated issues surrounding the psychological and social support of these children, providing them with tools and opportunities for children to connect and build support networks within the community. This has been specified as being delivered in the form of providing and assigning a social worker that will work closely with each individual child through an established individual specific plan, as well as a clinical or developmental psychologist to assess and improve their mental well-being. Additionally, Clause 9 guarantees that child offenders between the ages of 10 and 14 will be guaranteed access to a specialist education provider, where each child will create a specialized and individual specific plan that supports the development and identification of goals, future education destinations, achievements, and formal and informal skills. The curriculum will further cover and support the education surrounding important matters relevant to the current and future circumstances that a child is faced with and will need to integrate into the fabric of society. It is also important to note that this program is inclusive and considerate of children with culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds and shall provide the relevant support that they require. For far too long, Australia has been ignorant to the damaging nature of the juvenile detention system and how detrimental of an effect it has on Australia's children. It is evident that the juvenile detention system has not been beneficial to the needs of these children and have not addressed the underlying matters considering the structural, social, political, environmental, and historical issues that are present with the ongoing prominence of systemic racism and perception of colonial values within the modern structure of not only the legal system, but also the juvenile legal system. The treatment of Black and Indigenous people of colour youth, in particular, reinforces this fear-mongering rhetoric that attempts to create a sense of threat against the safety of the wider community and maintains the villainization of immigrant children looking for a community to establish themselves within and find a sense of belonging. It is not only harmful to the general workings of society, but within the juvenile legal system, it is unjustifiable to allow this treatment against our children and further damaging their perception of their worth and capability in society. This bill addresses these issues that have been long ignored, providing supportive framework to positively integrate them into the community and to avoid the detriment of the juvenile legal system before it is far too late. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member Van. I now call upon the lead refuter, who is Honourable Member Kulkarni.
Honourable Member Kulkarni. The main thing of concern here is the presence of VYJAB, or VIJAB for short. This authority that's proposed within the bill is not only overreaching in its power, but fully and totally the wrong way to go about solving the problems within the juvenile detention center. Though we acknowledge problems within the current justice system for youths, this bill is not only unnecessary, but actively exacerbates the problems it tries to solve of discrimination against Indigenous youths, of a lack of rehabilitation, and a general excessive punishment within the justice system. Rather than improving the juvenile detention system as a whole, this bill proposes making a strange and esoteric council to review the cases of those to age 10 to 14 and place them under a totally unique environment of punishment, sentences, and psychological assessments. Consider this analogy as to why the mechanism for this bill is both clearly counterintuitive and negative. Say you have a car, and this car has a broken tire. You need to go from A to B. But instead of improving the car and fixing the car, you buy another motorbike. That is exactly what they're doing with this bill. When instead of improving the juvenile detention system, they're instead creating this other source called VIJAB, where it promotes a council that has diverts resources away from the juvenile detention system. What this actually does is divert resources, time, and attention away from improving the juvenile detention system for everyone, instead focus on creating an esoteric rules of unprecedented rules for only those aged 10 to 14. Those aged 14 to 17 are also under our duty of care and also should be included in this rehabilitative model. Why is this bad for youth justice? As already mentioned, this detracts from youth justice as a whole and leaves aged people from age 14 to 17 high and dry. But the main problem is that even if the resources are not detracted and not split, splitting up the resources between two systems is an inefficient use of resources as compared to making the holistic juvenile detention system from everyone from age 10 to 17 better is a more efficient and more effective way of using resources. However, this is not my main criticism of this point. Even if the program VIJAB was a utopian source of efficiency and resource management, there's a glaring issue within the bill that makes it impossible for it to be passed within good conscience. The exorbitant and unchecked power of the VIJAB Council over the justice system is a flaw so problematic that I think it warrants not passing the bill based on it alone. According to clause 5.3, VIJAB reserves the right to research and implement innovative juvenile reforms which promote rehabilitation. This gives this council unprecedented power to pass legislation for youth justice without any oversight. They can promote juvenile reform which promote rehabilitation. These are selected people, unselected people within this council, chosen by an undisclosed set of people who now have the power to alter and implement legislation and reform. They are beholden to no courts. There are no checks and balances to the power presented within this bill. And they can simply implement reform on the basis that they're within this council. This goes against everything that the Commonwealth Government of Australia and Victoria is built upon. No court is dictating or preventing this power of VIJAB. There are no bounds to what they can and cannot pass. And in the name of rehabilitation, they can apparently do anything to those that they're under their care. Even if VIJAB were to be full of upstanding and effective people, the precedent of setting a council so much power needs to be avoided. For context, even the Royal Commission has no authority to implement any reform. Honorable members of parliament, I would like you to consider what clause 5.3 actually means, the depth of this problem and the dangerous precedent it presents the Victorian state as a whole. This also translates, as a side point, to a general overreach of power for VIJAB as an organization. They can, without the backing of courts, give out, rehabilitative reform at whatever rate they so please, with no punishment or with no precedent or limitation to how they give out their sentences. There's no guideline that has been placed on VIJAB so far. Though this is less of concern than clause 9.3, there is, this problem is worth considering. And these kind of problems are also touched on in the proposing members themselves. They identify the discrimination of Indigenous and people of color youth as a problem. Yet they don't understand that giving so much power to something like a government, which is already proven to be problematic and damaging to these communities, might be threatening. Right? We've already seen how sources of government have been dangerous, and giving so much power to a council called VIJAB over these marginalized people is incredibly dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member Kulkarni. We'll now open it up for debate, and I will call upon, if it's been spotlighted.
Thank you, Speaker. The Honourable Member Blair. I'd just like to touch on to the previous argument. The judicial system is already, the separation of powers regarding the unprecedented powers, this can simply be mitigated by the judicial system that vested by the Constitution is power to govern over. This is why we have the separation of powers. But today's bill marks a step in the right direction. It's a direction that'll place Australia within the median age of criminal responsibility worldwide. With over 31 countries worldwide recommending Australia to reach the age, it is time we make action. The evidence is clear. 10-year-olds belong with their families and friends, not in prison cells. Locking up children as young as 10 does not make the community any safer. Instead, it further entrenches those children in the criminal system, within the criminal legal system, and proves that governments have failed to provide safe support systems. Yet for years, the evidence has stacked up, with more than 80% reoffending, and for every year a child was older when they appeared before the criminal court, there was an 18% decline in the likelihood of reoffending. But further than this, children's brains and patterns of behaviour are still developing up until their late teens. So by purposely segregating and locking children up, we are only restricting their development and ability to attain better life later on, particularly as the majority of young people who are placed in the juvenile detention system have already faced traumatic experience and serious adversities. According to a 2017 Australian Institute of Health and Wellbeing report, studies show that 3 in 5 children aged 10 at the age of their first sentencing were also in child protection. But beyond this, the system put in place for youth offenders has failed continually at creating better outcomes for children, begging the question of what true purpose juvenile detention centres are made for, as continually cases such as Dondale and Barwon Maximum Prison showcase the horrific conditions and abuse these children are subjected to. Thank you, and I will now pass on to the Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member Blair. I now call upon the next speaker, who is the Honourable Member Liu?
Speaker, the Honourable Member Liu. Now, I would just first like to point out some blatant flaws as stated by the government. Firstly, the government stated that they can, the blatant overreach of power and possible risk of corruption in VIJAB can be easily mitigated using this separation of powers. However, the bill they've presented clearly states that VIJAB is outside of that they will not hold people criminally responsible. Instead, they promote rehabilitation and education. This means that they're literally outside of the jurisdiction of the court system, and which means the separation of powers has no limit over them, which further fuels our point, which is that they have unchecked and unaccounted for power. Now, I would first like to strongly highlight and emphasize the fact that the court is already unbelievably lenient towards child offenders. Right now, there is a legal concept called Dole and Capax that in practice means that due to the lack of experience and moral development, the child is incapable of committing an offense as they cannot truly determine what is morally right and wrong. And therefore, all children under current Victorian law, aged 10 to 14, are automatically presumed to be literally unable to commit a crime. The caveat in that is that the prosecution can still charge the young offender if they prove that they did, in fact, possess the understanding of the nature of what they were doing. In this case, although the child is given every benefit of the doubt, there is still an amount of flexibility that the judicial system needs. Improving the status quo would serve much, much better because it does not take the overly idealistic, silver bullet, downright naive solution the government proposes and understands that inevitably there will be exceptions, especially in this age range, as children aged 10 to 14 will have a much greater understanding of moral responsibilities and moral rights and wrongs compared to people under 10. Under VIJAB, everyone under 14 is now criminally responsibility-free with no consideration of the different speeds and levels of moral understandings that can exist at that stage. Therefore, this bill should not be in good conscience passed and forsaken for the alternative option. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member Liu. I now call upon the next speaker, and that is the Honourable Member Ngugo.
The Honourable Member No. As the Honourable Member Van has pointed out, far too long, Victoria has been ignorant of the damaging nature of the criminal legal system and the detrimental effects that it has on Victorian youths, in particular those of the BIPOC community, who are forced to face systemic racism that exists in our criminal legal system and media, which has caused a clear overrepresentation of BIPOC individuals in youth detention centres. In 2018 alone, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare reported that almost 60% of the youth in the criminal legal system were Indigenous, despite the fact that Indigenous youth only make up 5% of the general population. This disproportionate rate of Indigenous children being placed into youth detention facilities is symptomatic of systemic racism and ongoing effects of colonization that continue to prosecute these communities, such as disenfranchisement, dispossession of Aboriginal land, and loss of both connection and culture. Systemic racism in the media is particularly evident in the prosecution of Sudanese youth gangs, which, despite how the media portrays them, have the same rates of offending as any other group, but incarcerated at a higher rate than most other groups. The media chooses to focus almost wholeheartedly on these particular groups to perpetuate the fear-mongering, racist rhetoric and villainization of both Indigenous and immigrant children in order to quote-unquote protect the community at the cost of the children's future. Now, I'd ask you, when are we going to abandon these antiquated and evil stereotypes and actually make an effort to move forward and address the real issues that are causing this criminal behavior, such as the structural, societal, and environmental and historical factors that attack these communities every day? Thank you, Speaker.
You're just on mute, Sam, sorry.
On mute. Still doing it after all these months. Thank you, Honourable Member Ngugo. I'll call upon the next member, and that is the Honourable Member Curry.
Speaker, the Honourable Member Curry. I'd first like to raise the point that the government mentioned the media's effect on youth offenders. Well, I would like to ask whereabouts in the bill it addresses any of the media's implications on the issue that you're raising to do with youth offenders. I'd like to question the validity of the government's bill, where in clause 3, it defines a child as between the ages of 14 and 18. Mr. Speaker, if this is how we classify a child, then I would like to ask what we call anyone aged under 14, an infant perhaps? But if we are to accept this definition, I express my confusion to the honourable children of this parliament, as this definition contradicts the entire bill's purpose. In clause 1, part B, it states that the bill aims to remove children between ages 10 and 14 from the juvenile detention system. How can a child be defined as only 14 and 18 in the definition, and then between 10 and 14 later on in the bill? This makes no sense and is completely contradictory. This same confusing contradiction is made twice in clause 4, and again in clause 7, and again in clause 8, and again in clause 9. Thus undermining the effect of these clauses and in extension, the entire effect of the bill itself. Each time the bill refers to the children, they are effectively referring to people aged between 14 and 18. This age bracket is outside any of the proposed changes they are making to the criminal age of responsibility, making any changes that the bill proposes useless. Where this bill addresses such a significant issue, I express my deepest concerns for accepting a bill that is not worded to make any sense and request that it be duly amended. Thank you, and I will now pass on to the Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member Curry. I'll now call upon the next speaker, who is Honourable Member Nugent.
Speaker, the Honourable Member Wing. The Honourable Member Ngo has rebutted against the damaging quote-unquote community safety rhetoric that has demonized specifically our Indigenous and immigrant youth. He has shed light on some of the many structural, societal, environmental, and historical factors that lead to criminal behaviour. Our bill sets out to overcome these external causes with wraparound care and a support framework utilised by Parkville College, which centres on the needs of individual children in order to promote the best possible rehabilitation. In 2019, Parkville College reported that out of the student population there, 67% were victims of abuse, trauma, or neglect. 38% presented issues concerning their intellectual functioning, and 4% were registered with disability service. Now tell me, are we supposed to deny these children a right to their education instead of providing them with the support where the community has failed to? These children deserve to have a voice in their futures and to be seen. The rehabilitation program assigns each child with a social worker who will work closely to establish an individual specific plan that is responsive to their personal needs. This shall include appropriate therapy on a case-by-case basis, periodic check-ins, both within and outside of the facility, and the tools and opportunities to allow children to connect with and build support networks within their communities for the long term. This empathy-driven sentiment is echoed throughout the alternative education program. In addition to an integrative curriculum that provides education on topics such as mental health, sexual health, financial literacy, and career development, each student is able to choose the educational pathway that is most relevant to them. Furthermore, the gross overrepresentation of Indigenous and immigrant children within custody demands cultural responsiveness to underline a successful transition. Alternative education and rehabilitation needs to be approached as a process, not a result. To deny our youth these opportunities is to deny them a future. Children need to be treated like children, not a statistic. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member Wynne. I now will call upon the next speaker, and that is Honourable Member Tatya.
Speaker, the Honourable Member Tateja. The government has continuously referred back to the point of systemic racism, yet they seem to forget the correlation and, I suppose, the consequences of having an association as powerful as VIJAB over this systemic racism that they continue to refer to, which we as the opposition agree with as well. VIJAB, in its almost unconstitutional power, has the ability to put in any kind of reform that they see fit without any, I suppose, any sort of check and balance system above them. Furthermore, I would like to speak more to clause 9.2 and 9.3, where we are giving at-risk children who are already struggling in a risky environment, whether it be in positions of power, we are already putting more responsibility on them to now come up with educational pathways and career pathways. How on earth can we expect 10 to 14-year-olds who apparently are children according to who apparently are not children according to my colleague, the Honourable Member Curry, how can we expect them to already be aware of what they want to do with their life and their career? There is no, I suppose, consideration for what they're going through as at-risk youth. They cannot be expected to already be dealing with a grave amount of concerns and perhaps personal issues to then be given another burden of the responsibility of their education pathway. That is not the responsibility of any young person in the state of Victoria. That is mandated by the state, by our education department. Why are we then to provide at-risk individuals, as I've mentioned time and time again, who are struggling in their communities, the forced responsibility and requirement to come up with their own education pathways? We as the opposition see that reform better than the unnecessary creation of a brand new association. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I shall now hand it back to you.
Thank you, Honourable Member Tatasha. I'll now call upon the next speaker, who is the Honourable Member Usman.
Speaker, the Honourable Member Osman. I would just like to point out to the opposition that we have never have and never will deny that 10 to 14-year-olds are not children. They are children inherently. We are working towards raising the age of criminal responsibility so we do not have to consider placing them in prison systems. Second of all, I would really love if the opposition could understand that we are not trying to get children to think about their futures and take complete control of that. They're doing that in a way that is supported and facilitated by the individuals at the Parkville College framework, as well as individuals working with the body that we've outlined. The juvenile legal system has consistently, historically, and continually failed the children of Victoria. It's failed to protect these children and address the underlying contributing factors that underscore their behaviors, and thus enable them an opportunity to stay within their communities and be rehabilitated. As of 2019, over 620 children were in detention facilities in Victoria alone, my sister being one of them previously. Our bill seeks to disrupt the systemic neglect and injustice faced by these children by implementing the Victorian Youth Justice and Advocacy Body. This body will advocate for the needs of every child that it encounters, and a preventative and responsive effort to ensure that children do not continue to end up or remain in the detention system. This body will assess each child's case, ensure they receive the support, resources, and encouragement that they need and deserve to work towards a sustainable future, informed by their aspirations. The presence of children in prison is a failure, and it's not only indicative of broader structural, cultural, and societal failures, but a clear example of how previous governments and current legal systems have failed children. The representatives that sit on this body are recruited from organizations and task forces that center community and youth well-being and acknowledge the underlying factors to these issues. There is no room in this future that the government envisions for children to be in prison. There never will be. Children should be in classrooms, on playgrounds. They should be with friends and family. They should be learning fundamental life skills and be offered specialist support to enable them to create a future of their choosing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member Usman. I'll now call upon the next speaker, who is Honourable Member Nuzabul.
Speaker, the Honourable Member Nurjov. As my fellow opposition speakers have already pointed out, this bill has several inherent flaws that completely impede its effectiveness. I will now talk about the complete lack of a mechanism to properly deal with serious offenders that exist in this bill. Let me explain. As the previous government speaker has clearly stated, why do children commit these offences? They commit these offences because of their environment. They might be living in poverty. They might have an unstable household, an abusive parent, or some other problem plaguing their life. A serious child offender, such as a child who, for example, is a murderer, only does these acts as a culmination of their environment. This bill proposes that we keep these dangerous offenders in society. That not only do we send them back to these terrible environments that cause them to commit such acts with token education programs, where they pose a danger to others, but so that the negative environment can continue to influence them and impede in their rehabilitation. The thing is, the solution to the problem of youth crime already exists in our juvenile detention program. Offenders are not only kept separate from society, offenders are not only kept separate from the toxic environment which caused them to commit their crimes, they're allowed to be fully rehabilitated without posing as a danger to other members of society. We do not need to create a new program with inconsistent terminology and without proper methods to deal with systemic racism, a second layer of unnecessary bureaucracy. Instead, what we need is a holistic reform to fix the current juvenile detention system. It is because of all of these reasons, as well as the reasons of the previous opposition speakers, that I call for all honourable members of this parliament to, if they truly wish to solve the problem of youth crime, to vote against this ineffective bill. Thank you, Speaker. I yield my time.
Thank you, Honourable Members Nurzu. I'll now call upon the next speaker, and that is the Honourable Member. Is it the Honourable Member Coe?
The Honourable Member Coe. I would like to bring the Assembly's attention to the fact that time and time again, the opposition has stated that there are many flaws in our bill and that our holistic approach is ineffective, improbable, and unrealistic. However, they have not proposed any alternatives. They have stated that they want to make changes to the current juvenile detention system. However, they have not provided any alternatives. As they have said, our current justice system detains and is a punitive punishment process for youths who are convicted of crimes. As they have stated, serious offenders are removed from the community and instead isolated. During their most formative years. How is this as a status quo any beneficial to a child? How is that any beneficial to a child's developmental physiology, psychology, or education? It has been studied and proven that low-risk offenders who enter the juvenile detention system are more likely to come out of that system and reoffend with higher risk crimes. The opposition has attempted to state that our body is discriminatory and lacks perspective within these youth that are affected by these issues. However, they have neglected the fact that our bill stipulates that one of the members that must be a part of YJAB is the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Council. This for a start is better than the status quo, which relies on racist systematic protocols. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member Koch. We'll call upon the next speaker, who is the Honourable Member Grewal.
Speaker, the Honourable Member Grewal. Speaker, frankly, I find it shocking the approach the government is taking to solve a very personal and tragic issue facing the youth. There is no denying that there is a problem, but the government's approach highlights the disconnect between the issue and the legislation that is trying to solve it. Parliamentarians, there is a defining aspect that separates children from adults, and that is their mental maturity. At the age of 14 or under, children are merely the reflections and the outcomes of their environment. They have little to no independence, and as such, they reflect the environment in which they were raised rather than their own moral beliefs. And the majority of these children do not have psychological reasons that prevent them from understanding right from wrong, as the Honourable Member Liu has shown. But they are simply ordinary children who are raised in an environment of no alternatives. Simply prescribing psychiatrists and professionals like antibiotics to treat an infection demonstrates how the government is oblivious to the living conditions and harsh reality of youth offenders. The opposition believes isolation is necessary for two reasons. One, which is the first one, which is to isolate violent and dangerous children, as the Honourable Member Nuzarov has shown, from society, which is something so common sense it need not be debated. It's the core functionality of incarceration. But the second reason, which I'd like to touch on, is to isolate children who can be rehabilitated from the hostile environment, which is solely responsible for their actions. The second reason is especially critical because when we deal with children, we must recognize they cannot make up their own minds. They are merely reflections of their environment, and as such, they should not be slapped on the wrist and sent home to the environment that has led to their actions. Now, the Honourable Member No has told us how the government's current system is racist and biased towards Indigenous Australians without even showing us what is exactly wrong with the status quo. And Juvenile detention system has a lot of experience and doesn't run the risk of corruption and power imbalance, such like a new thing like YJAB might have. Rather than replace a working system that has infrastructure and investment like the government suggests, we propose an alternative, focusing on improving and reforming the detention system. And to answer the honourable member Cole's concern about alternatives, we believe greater investment is required to provide better educational, extracurricular, and social opportunities to extend themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member Gruhl. Okay, I will pass on to the next speaker. And that is Honourable Member, is it St. Pierre?
Yeah, I believe the floor is open. So, Speaker, Honourable Member St. Pierre, I believe that the opposition is not able to determine that a child is human. Humanity is, something. You and I are all human. And this pushes to think, why would they not be able to have an education? Why shouldn't they have an education? These things provide them with the ability to have a future. When times get dark, if you have something to look up to, or that the children should be able to look up to, this will give them determination and a possibility to change for the better. Some criminals, children included, do it out of need, stealing to get money to feed people. Some people do it to feed their family. And if they manage to get an education while in a rehabilitation center, wouldn't that mean that they have a higher chance of succeeding, higher chance of becoming a valuable member of society? Jail has been proven to make people more likely to reoffend, and putting young people in that situation is terrible because it makes them learn that it is normal to commit crime. They grow up in an environment that is extremely negative. It is no secret that there are drugs, there are a lot of violence in these scenarios, and that is something that needs to be looked at. If you put children, young people in those scenarios, they're more likely to repeat the actions that they learned there. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member St. Pierre. I'll call upon the next speaker.
Speaker, Speaker, the Honourable Member Liu. Now, the Honourable Member St. Pierre mentioned humanity, which is funnily enough, because there is an abundance of humanity already provided to children within the legal system. The system provides so much leniency for children, which the government fails to address in any of their speeches. I would like to say that right now, the vast majority of child offenders go into the courts, and the courts, understanding that there needs to be some type of reform for the children and for the juvenile detention system, they pretty much always give a community correction order that's they have to serve in the community.
Sorry, members. I'd just like to interject just quickly. Just like to remind everyone that you once you speak, once you have spoken, you won't be able to speak again. So unfortunately, we can't have the Honourable Member Liu speak again. So we'll need someone else from the opposition.
My apologies to the chamber.
Okay, the next speaker is the Honourable Member Hackett.
Speaker, the Honourable Member Hackett. As someone who works as an educator in a community secondary school designed specifically for vulnerable young people, I know that preventative measures are best in most situations. However, some young people simply do not take to this kind of approach. No matter how many chances you give them, they're just not wired to fit into society with rules and laws set out for them. Psychologists have determined that children from 6 years old know right from wrong. And we've also heard from the sponsor that these young offenders are likely suffering trauma. But what right does that give them to traumatise others? I know I'm talking about the minority here, but the bill mentions nothing of repeat offenders and what will come of them. Will they be tried as adults? Will juvenile detention be ruled out altogether? And will they be left, in a hole? I'm not one for believing that locking all children up behind bars is the best solution, but how can the sponsors be certain that it isn't the best solution for some? Some young people just simply cannot be rehabilitated. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member Hackett. I'll call upon the next speaker now, and I've got the Honourable Member Vernon.
Speaker, the Honourable Member Vernon. I work at the Commission for Children and Young People of Victoria. I'm only 16. I would like people to put that into perspective. I've seen case studies where people have been purely put into the criminal system because of 2 offences, one of which was, and I'm not joking here, stealing too many mints from a restaurant, and the second was taking home art supplies from school. They were then placed into the juvenile system. The opposition is denying these kids the humanity that they deserve. You cannot tell me that when the opposition was 10 years old, that you guys were, I just want to play around in primary school and not bother about anything. The least of your worries should be concerned about fending for yourself and like having mints at home. The opposition has failed to consider the humanity that is needed for these children. The Honourable Member Hackett presents a point about repeat offenders, but it needs to be addressed that it can depend on what the repeat is. If it's stealing money purely because they need to fend for their family, then something needs to be taken into action. This bill was also the Curie Youth Group, which is almost a legal body. This bill shows the humanity that the opposition has clearly failed to show. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member Vernon. Okay, we'll now go to the next speaker. If we have one. We got Honourable Member Noble.
Yes, Speaker, the Honourable Member Noble. I just wanted to point out that the opposition did highlight that there are issues within our youth criminal system, and that they highlighted that instead of creating a new institution that draws from money, a lot of money, we should instead aim for reform and create a better youth criminal system that doesn't allocate this power. Yes, I agree with the Honourable Member Vernon that that is a very out of place punishment for that crime, and that is something that needs to be changed. But I think that, as the opposition said, that there are flaws within this bill that do not allow it to be passed.
Thank you, Honourable Member Noble. I'll pass on to the next speaker. Have we got someone? I've got the Honourable Member. I'm sorry, I can't quite see your full name on the screen. Starts with an S.
Saunders.
Saunders. Honourable Member Saunders.
Speaker, the Honourable Member Saunders. The opposition has stated that children should not be required to know what they want to do in their future. While we do not expect children to yet know what they want to do with their lives, all people should be aware of the impacts of committing offences. Even children should know that committing crimes is not an okay way with dealing with difficult situations. In addition, the opposition stated that the bill is suggesting that dangerous children will be let back into the community. This is inaccurate, as extensive education systems are mandatory for serious offenders under this bill. Children are also not being released back into damaging environments. Rehabilitation does not only include systems for children, but also family therapy and at-home visits that aim to reduce violence and difficult situations in home communities for these children. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member Saunders. I'm now going to call upon the sponsor of the bill for their right of reply. Honourable Member Van.
Thank you, Speaker. The Honourable Member Van. As a part of the Skyline Foundation, we have been a committed not-for-profit organisation that provides intensive support for high ability and high resilience students who are at risk of falling through the cracks of a range of factors that act as a detriment to their ability to achieve the future that they desire. As a party, we believe in supporting youth and investing into the well-being and future of vulnerable young people. We believe that children are and continue to build and structure the future of Australia and have so much power to create influential and great change. It all starts with the nurturing and supportive framework that we create for them in the most developmental stages of life, addressing the underlying issues, rehabilitating them, and providing them with an affirmative vision of the future that they can achieve. Not only that, but we solely need to emphasize the fact that these are children. I ask each member here to consider where they were at the age of 10, consider the innocence that was held and the support that was needed in order to be brought to this very position now. Children should be in classrooms. Children should be on playgrounds. Children should be and feel supported and connected by their family, friends, and community. Victoria is ready to begin the ongoing reaction that will affect how states perceive the issue of raising the age, because Victoria has been ready to raise the age. Victoria is not afraid of allowing children to feel like a member of the community. We are not afraid of supporting these children. We are not afraid of allowing these children to believe that they have a future. And Victoria is certainly not afraid of allowing children to be children. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member Van. Okay, I'm now going to put this to a vote, and that the question is that the Raising the Age of Criminal Responsibility Bill is now read a second and third time. All those to that opinion say aye. And to the contrary, no. Let's have I'll give this another 30 seconds. All right, I am going to say that the ayes have it. Is there a division required?
The Speaker, the Honourable Member Zatasia, I'd like to request a division.
All right, Honourable Member Tudasia has requested a division.
I have, yes.
So the House will now divide on the question that the Raising the Age of Criminal Responsibility Bill will be read a second and third time, and I ask the clerk to record the votes. I'd ask all members who are voting aye to react with a yes, and all those members who are voting no to react with a no. Okay, the results of the division is in. The 20 ayes, 27 noes, 8. Therefore, the division is resolved in the affirmative. So the bill passes. So congratulations, everyone, both teams. That was a terrific debate. That was, as I said, that was that raising the age of criminal responsibility is a really topical issue that is relevant right now. It's being decided by governments as we speak. And, you know, the contributions there were really well researched. They were really passionate, but you also really responded well on your feet and rebutted other points as well. So congratulations, everyone. It was an amazing debate, and good luck for the rest of the Youth Parliament. A bit different than actually being inside the chamber itself, but I think you're doing well to making it work, and probably setting an example for the wider Victorian Parliament as well, in terms of sitting online. So some lessons there. So thank you so much, everyone. I've really valued my time here today.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sam. And a huge congratulations to the sponsors of the bill, to Skyline, for successfully passing your bill. That's so exciting. I just want to echo what I shared earlier about Wellington. I know that we've been working on this and working on our bills for an awfully long time. It feels like there's been a lot of anticipation leading up here. So yeah, I think it's incredibly exciting that your bill has passed. I hope you feel really proud of yourselves. We might just throw to Kyra and or Miura if you guys have any feedback for the room. Kyra?
I think just off the bat, I think the